Hey guys, this is James from TeaDB bringing you InBetweenIsode number 74. So today we are continuing with the teas I own series. So last week we did some young tea, and I talked about young tea a little bit, how young tea is not something that I turn to regularly, and I only have two teas that I really reach for and have cakes like readily available for me to grab. That are just really easily accessible from my entire collection. So that really says something about my own drinking habits. And there's a really good article that I'd highly recommend people check out called The Speed Test on Marshallin. And it basically talks about maybe one of the better metrics for measuring how fast you'll go, how much you'll actually want to drink a test. Maybe even better than just thinking, oh, I enjoyed this tea X amount. It's just how fast you actually want to drink through the tea. And so this tea definitely passes the speed test. It's something that I picked up while I was in Hong Kong. I actually got this from the same vendor as the 2004 Commission 7542 that I reviewed a couple episodes back. So similar to that tea, this tea is traditionally stored. This is a 2001 Yiwu Spring Buds cake, and it hits a lot of tick boxes for me, but we actually tasted this cake blind without me knowing exactly what it was, and it was pretty, I immediately gravitated towards it, and part of that is just because the traditional storage of it I think is really nice, really clean. We're going to give this a rinse here. And as many of you know that follow the site regularly, I do have my biases towards Yiwu teas, and this definitely fits into something that has some of those characteristics, but is also unique and kind of interesting, and a really nice change of pace from the other Yiwu teas that I regularly drink. It cost me about a little over $100 for a 357 gram cake. So it's not the most amount I've spent on a cake, but it's also not the least amount. But if you calculate it per session, this session would be something like $1.50 or something. So a pretty reasonable amount to pay. Maybe a little bit more than that actually. All right. So this has a very particular aroma that I'm not used to smelling in a lot of teas. So it's been really difficult for me to describe. I almost want to call it sort of like rose. It's floral, but not really in the way that you would think of most teas, or at least 99% of teas being floral, which is interesting. So we are going to get right to it. And so traditionally stored teas, let me emphasize this again, this is not just any tea that was stored in Hong Kong. And that's really important because this will behave very different from what we would think of as like Hong Kong natural storage. So traditional storage is introduction to a really high heat and humidity environment for some period of time. Some people will say a year, some people will say 2 or 3 years. They're obviously varying extents, and then a drying out period. And it really helps to make these teas, it browns them very quickly. You could kind of think of it as like a slower, a little bit more complex ripening process, sort of like to how ripe Pu'erh is. At least that's kind of how I conceptualize it. And it gets the tea really nice and brown and dark quickly, and then the airing out period will help to really clean it up. And so this tea, in my opinion at least, tastes very, very clean. And so we actually tasted this tea when we were in the shop. We tasted it blind, and we tasted it side by side with another tea from a similar era. It was 2000, and that one was Hong Kong dry stored. And so immediately I thought this tea tasted much cleaner than that tea. And as we kept going, this tea started to drop off a bit, and part of it is probably because it is a buds cake, so it's probably going to be a little bit more front heavy. while the other cake picked up. And I ended up picking up this cake because it's half the price of the other cake. But it was a really, really interesting comparison. And then you would expect that the tea that, tasted more humid or whatever to have darker leaves. But we dumped out the leaves at the end, and sure enough, the traditionally stored tea had the darker leaves. So a few interesting things, characteristics to think about for traditional stored pu'erh. And it's not something that you can really find easily available in the West. And a lot of people call it, a lot of people will use this synonymously with Hong Kong dry storage or Hong Kong natural storage, which I think is a little bit unfortunate because it can be very misleading and very difficult to pin down. And it makes me also miss Origin Tea, who was one of the few vendors that really did give a lot of info and definitely took these things very seriously as far as representing them or misrepresenting them. So I'm about halfway through this cake already, and it makes me wish that I bought more than just the single cake, but I wasn't sure how much I was going to go through it. When I heard that it was a Buds cake, I became a little bit more hesitant. I have a few prejudices towards Bud cakes. Some of it's probably justified, other parts maybe not so justified. But we are going to get going. So steep number 1. Cheers, guys. So it's very, you see the red liqueur here. It's very full and rounded already. I'm getting sort of chocolatey notes. It's got a strong body right at the forefront. You can feel it go to the back of their mouth. I've been drinking a lot of Yangqin Hao teas recently, and so those teas have an incredible depth in the throat. This tea doesn't have that, at least to the extent. But it does go and have a lot of sweetness focused at the back of the mouth. So full body, nice rounded taste. So a few earth tones to it, not excessive ones. In fact, if you put this next to a different tea in probably a similar sort of storage, I suspect you'd get more earth tones from, for instance, the Munghai tea that we tasted this against. So even sweeter than the first tea. A little bit of sweet ginseng. There's definitely a little bit of strength or bitterness that's sort of focused at the front of the mouth, and then it rounds out, and it sort of you can taste the full body, then it moves to the back of the mouth. I find that right now it's sort of lingering back here, kind of towards the back of my cheeks. There's a little bit of feeling at the top of the throat, but it's not excessive. It's interesting because this tea, and I think it might have to do with contrast more than anything, is tasting more like a Munghai area tea, or at least characteristics that I associate with Munghai area teas than it normally does. I'm getting a bit more mushroomy. It's not quite as sweet as I'm used to. It's definitely got some earth tones to it, and I think part of that has to do with just the teas that I've been drinking lately. I've been drinking a lot of Mung La County, Greater Yiwu area teas, especially from Yangqin Hao, which have those Yiwu characteristics, often in spades, huge throat feels, very soft teas. So in comparison, this tea is thicker. It's got a more viscous body, but it's definitely not sort of like what you would chase after as far as like sort of gushu material or whatever. And for me, this tea has the right combination of like maturation and strength. This is not a tea that I think you would pick up to drink in 30 or 40 years. This is a tea that you would pick up to drink over the next few years. It's very tasty right now. Yeah, so not one for the hoarders, but one to drink, I would say. And that's kind of been my buying strategy, is to buy tea sort of like this that's mature enough and easy for me to drink, and buy enough of that for me to drink through at a periodic basis, and then really aim a little bit higher for the tea that's sort of into the mid to late 2000s. So the aroma is coming through even clearer. Light mushrooms and grain. Some sort of sweet fruit is what I'm getting. Sweet flute. I'm not sure. I can't exactly place it. It's a very unique aroma, and I actually had the opportunity to taste this tea in comparison to the 98 version that had been Malaysian stored. And the aroma on this, again, was just very unique, and also very, very difficult to pin down. I'm going to take one sip of this, and we will call it. So each steep, it's gotten increasingly smoother. It still has a nice, decent body. Yeah, and I'm just going to continue to enjoy this tea probably for the rest of the day, and for a few steeps tomorrow as well. This tea probably goes for 14 or 15 steeps, depending on how hard you want to push it. Alright guys, I think that just about wraps up this In-Between-isode. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys next week. Cheers.